I want to start with Boston College, and they'll play Michigan Tech in the first round, and this will be in the Providence region. You've got BC versus Michigan Tech, Wisconsin versus Quinnipiac. So really, if BC gets through Michigan Tech as we expect them to do, it's going to be a pretty tough regional final in that one, with the defending champion, then a Wisconsin team that was really rolling at various points of this season and has good goaltending. But, let's keep it with BC. We've talked a little bit about it. They've got, bona fide Hobie Baker candidates and Will Smith and Cutter Gauthier. I mean, like at this point, it's hard to see neither of them in they'll both be in the Hobie Hatrick. You would have to think, the way that they've played this year. We saw two teammates get in last year in that, but really this BC team, those guys get a lot of the headlines, but I think this weekend also showcased the importance of Jacob Fowler. You mentioned it at the top. Goaltending is really, I think, the key for BC going on a deep run, and Jacob Fowler has that winning pedigree.
He absolutely does. I think he's their most important player, which it has been somewhat of a controversial thing to say, because Will Smith has 67 points and Perreault is almost 60 and Leonard's got almost 30 goals. But to me, like, Fowler's the guy where there wasn't much of a backup plan there. Meaning, like, okay, if Will Smith didn't come in and have a 70-point freshman year the way that he has, or almost 70 points, and the way that some of those other top picks have had, there's another layer there which can pick up some of the slack, whether it's Gauthier or you have to think that not all three of those freshmen are going to come in and maybe have weaker freshman years than were expected. None of them have. They've all been fantastic. But if one of them did, there were other guys there to pick up the slack. There was no one there to pick up the slack if Jacob Fowler didn't have the type of freshman season that BC thought he was going to have. Their other goaltender is a freshman. So it was two freshmen. It was two guys that didn't have any playing experience at the NCAA level. But I think, and you hinted at it, Fowler is just a winner. I mean, he's won at every single level. You look at his numbers. Not only did he win the Clark Cup last year, but you look at his numbers in those playoffs, and it's like, I think he had a goals against of about 1.5 and a save percentage up in the 930s in the biggest games of the year. So I think he's the most important player on that team, the most important freshman on that team, and I think he just wins. On the biggest stage is when he seems to play his best hockey, which for someone in that position, that's what you want. He doesn't melt under the bright lights. It actually, I think, brings out the best in his game. So we saw that over the weekend. I mean, they kind of dismantled UMass and BU, had big advantages in those games, but look back to some of the big saves he made on the penalty kill both nights, which probably helped keep the momentum on BC side and not swing the other way. He's a big-time goalie. He's a real big-time. It's hard to, or easy to forget sometimes, that he is only a freshman because of the way that he plays.
Yeah, such maturity, and as you mentioned, I mean, last year Clark Cup winning goaltender, with the Youngstown Phantoms, and even he was in the 950s for most of the playoffs, which was just insane to watch. One of the greatest individual performances we've ever seen, and the Clark Cup MVP, the USHL Goalie of the Year. I mean, going into the draft last year, he was one of the most decorated goaltenders, and so you've got that, and you mentioned Will Smith's point total, and 67 points for a true freshman. And you look back, and we were talking, 9 points over his last two games, which is just absolutely insane. In two playoff games where he just kind of took over, 67 points. The only freshman that was a U19 freshman, because Kyle Connor was a little bit older when he came into school, the only U19 freshman with more points in the last 30 plus years is Jack Eichel, who had 71. And actually, Will Smith is scoring above his point per game rate this season at 1.81. It's more similar to Adam Fantilli last year. So when we look at that, I mean, how has that shifted the Hobie Baker conversation? Because I think we were all thinking it's Macklin Celebrini, it's Cutter Gauthier, and then it's probably, Jackson Blake, if they wanted to kind of spread it around the country a little bit more. But to see what has happened, I mean, Will Smith, how do you leave him out now? His resume is incredibly similar to those of the Hobie Baker winning freshmen of the last few years.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And I'm not on the committee this year. I just finished a 3-year term on the committee. So I'm curious how that conference call is going to go. It's after the regionals. They have a conference call that debates the final 10, and then everybody sends in their vote. And that, from that vote is where they get to the top 3. Those get invited to the Frozen Four, and then there's the winner. There is no second vote, though. I think everybody sends in their top 5, and it's the top 3 get invited to the Frozen Four, and then the winner is chosen from that top 10 vote. There's no second round of voting once you only get to 3. But it's going to be very interesting because this is one of those years where sometimes I think you can get someone else that sneaks in. And this has happened with, at times when North Dakota's had a couple of candidates or Minnesota's had a couple of candidates where that vote can get split a little bit. And out here, if you've got Eastern-based voters, I think you could split the vote among a number of people: Smith, Gauthier, Perreault, and Leonard, right at the top of the list. Lane Hudson, I think, would also garner some votes. I don't even think Leonard actually is in the top 10, believe it or not. He's got 27 goals.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah,
it's a situation where there's going to be so many, and there are so many guys that are eligible for voting that are Eastern based. It could split some of that vote, and I'm curious to see what happens. And that was a concern, I think, last year, among Cooley and Fantilli, was would the Western the committee members that are based in the West, would that split some of that vote, and would that boost someone like a Lane Hudson? I think, I forget who the third finalist was last year, but there was, and when at the time of the vote, you're just talking about the top 10, and you wonder if that happens. It's going to be interesting to see who the Hobie Hatrick is.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I've never been part of that process, and often, as there have been a lot of debates about upperclassmen, and you look at a guy like Colin Graff, and it's just like the numbers just don't stack up. There isn't an upperclassman that has a better resume than any of the freshmen or sophomores in this group. Maybe you say, oh well, are we going to throw a bone to a goalie? I don't think Kyle McClellan's save percentage is high enough to get into that conversation. It's really hard, the threshold for a goalie to win. But I mean, I think at this point, I still think there's a real good opportunity for it to be an all Boston Hobie Hatrick with I think Celebrini has been, you can make the case for him. You can make a case for Hudson. You can make a case for Gauthier. You can make a case for Will Smith. And Gabe Perreault not even in it, so like that, nor is Leonard, as you mentioned. So, it's going to be fascinating to watch.